It's been a while since I used Logic stock plugins for a mastering session, so after updating Logic Pro and my operating system and hoping everything still works, I've created a couple of mastering chains. For the first chain, I'll use the new Chroma Glow Saturator and a blend of the adaptive and legacy limiters. But then I'll compare that to Logic's new algorithmic mastering and see if one sounds better than the other. So let's jump into mastering with Logic stock plugins in 2025 and see how far they've come. Before we start, here's a looped segment of the track that we're mastering without any additional processing introduced. Let's insert a linear phase EQ and discuss some issues with mid and side. So at first I was excited to try the dual mono mode of the linear phase EQ. It's been around for a bit, but I just never used it. So instead of creating mid-side filters, you first insert the plugin in dual mono, click the circle with the dots in it, change it from left and right to mid and side channels, and now you have a linear phase EQ that lets you affect the mid and side separately. However, as I began creating the filters that I usually do, I started hearing increased phase issues that became more pronounced the more I adjusted them. And as you can imagine, as I layered additional forms of processing and amplified quieter details, this kind of washing sound had a massive effect on the sound quality. So for the time being, I'd recommend sticking to a stereo EQ if you're using this stock plugin. Now for this track, I boosted a little of the kick and the subs with a shelf, dipped around 250 Hz to reduce its masking effect to higher frequencies, in turn making the track sound clearer, and I dipped some of the aggressive resonance that's popping up around 1 kHz. Then I added some clarity to the vocal's third formant, or the area where a lot of vowels and consonants have info, and ended up boosting that range by about 1.5 dB. Lastly, a shelf on the high frequencies brought up some of the air and the high-end details. Nothing too complex, and you'll need to adjust your filters to account for your track's unique makeup, but this is a good starting point for most tracks. Let's take a listen and notice its subtle but beneficial impact. For the next insert, let's use compression. So I was hoping to find some straightforward RMS compressor that Logic had made, but it looks like I'll have to use very subtle compression instead. Now the multipressor that they have has some RMS functionality, but honestly, I don't want to look at it. I don't think they've updated this thing in like 20 years. Also, I don't want to deal with that expansion section, so it looks like the basic compressor is the best choice for this. After testing mid-side compression, I ran into the same issue as with mid-side EQ. Lots of phase interference, and a generally bad sound. Sticking with stereo compression, I went with the vintage Opto compressor, using a low ratio around 1.5 to 1, a softer knee, a moderate attack around 40 milliseconds, a release around 200 milliseconds, and auto gain off. I can achieve some very subtle compression. It's just enough to help control dynamics without making any audible changes to the timbre. Now since this effect is so subtle, let's move on to the next insert, which is Chroma Glow, used for saturation. So Chroma Glow is newer. This was my first time trying it out, and honestly, it's a great sounding plugin. You get 5 models, 2 styles for each model, and you can bypass the effect below a certain frequency. Now for this track, I picked Modern Tube, and I enjoyed the colorful option, but if you're mastering, I'd recommend either picking this model or Magnetic. The other sounds too aggressive for most situations. Also, after having those phase issues with my mid-side filters during the EQ stage and compression stage, I don't really trust Logic's mix amounts. If this plugin alters the phase at all, then that's going to cause interference as soon as the original signal is blended in. Instead, I'll keep the effect at 100% and use a low drive value to achieve just a little saturation. So let's listen to Chroma Glow being enabled. Next up, let's introduce some upward processing. So other than limiting, Logic doesn't have anything that maximizes the signal, and by that I mean something that amplifies from the noise floor up while leaving the peaks alone. So I'll use parallel compression instead to achieve a dense sound full of lower level signal. Again, I don't want to use the wet dry or the mix since I'm hearing phase issues, so I'll use a send, insert the compressor, and then compress a good amount. Now the type you pick is up to you, but I found that vintage FET with a slightly longer attack had a nice punchy sound. Now with it, I achieved about 20 dB of attenuation using a 16:1 ratio and a harder knee shape. Once it sounded the way I wanted it to, I blended in the compressed signal with the original via the Aux-Trax channel fader. Too much and the compression becomes audible, too little and it might as well not be there. So let's listen to the parallel track being enabled and notice how it impacts the overall master as I adjust its level. Real quick, Sage Audio is an analog mastering studio. We've been around for 20 years, and mastering starts at $49 a track. There's a link in the description and an ad at the end of the video if you want to learn more. Placed on the stereo output so that I'm affecting both the original channel and the parallel channel, we have tone shaping or gradual EQ. I really enjoy Logic's vintage EQ collection, especially the Pultec emulation. Now it's great for the classic Pultec low-end trick in which you boost the lows, then attenuate the same range. It creates a boost in the sub and low frequencies and a dip in the low mids, similar to what I did with the first EQ that we used. Then, a subtle boost to the high mids will bring the vocal forward. The filters are very gradual, so odds are the entire frequency response is affected in some way, so use low settings and listen intently when you're using this plugin. Additionally, it has a nice saturation effect. A little goes a long way when you're mastering, but fortunately, this effect is subtle, so you could use it up to a value of about 2 before it's too noticeable. Let's take a listen. Before we test out Logic's newish mastering plugin, let's introduce limiting. So I'll be honest, I really don't like either one of Logic's stock limiters. Simply put, I think they sound bad and ruin the transients. But if you don't have another option, you could use a combination of the adaptive limiter with the traditional limiter to get a better result. First, insert the adaptive limiter, turn off the DC offset, and set look ahead to about 20 milliseconds. Achieve a couple of dB of attenuation at most. Hopefully with the 20 milliseconds of look ahead, the processor won't alter the peaks too much. Then, use the other limiter and amplify the signal by a couple of dB. Now since it peaked at 0 dB with the adaptive limiter, we should achieve as much attenuation here as we amplify. Use a lower look ahead and listen carefully for distortion, since this plugin will absolutely introduce that quicker than you expect. Again, I'm not a fan and I'd recommend trying a free limiter like Wavebreaker instead, but let's check out these two limiters. Last up for this video, let's try Logic's Mastering Assistant. So as soon as I click the mastering text, the plugin will analyze the signal. That said, I want to disable anything that I don't want in the chain before I do this. So I bypass my limiters and the 2BQ. With the assistant open, and after it analyzes the signal, the plugin will create a new frequency response based on some preset standard running behind the scenes. You can adjust the amount and switch characters, which has a subtle to moderate change on the track's timbre. If you want, you can enable the custom EQ section and introduce some very gradual shaping to the response. To the right, we have the loudness dial, which seems to introduce both upward processing and limiting, with the cap always set to -1 dB true peak. The excite button adds harmonics to the high frequency range, and we also get a loudness meter. Width acts like a mid-side pan, in which we change the amplitude of the mid and side images, while observing our correlation meter, which is ideally more positive or correlated between the left and right channels. Lastly, I noticed that bypass strangely introduces phase cancellation, and loudness compensation doesn't fully compensate the loudness. So in both instances, the effect will sound better on than when it's off, but that's only because it's not giving you an accurate depiction of the signal when it's off. Just something to keep in mind. Now, I'm not going to share my personal thoughts on this plugin, but let's listen to the chain created with the stock plugins, and then the chain finished with this assistant. Again, with the limiters and 2BQ off, since this plugin is handling those aspects. So let me know in the comments if you have a preference. Get professional analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Tulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating masters that don't accurately translate what you hear in your head when you could instantly fix a problem by clicking the link in the description and working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do. We've mastered thousands of songs that accurately translate what each client hears in their head, and it'll work for you too. Click the link in the description now and get direct access to us for personalized analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head.